The siege of Suiyang took place from January to October 757. For 8 months and 2 weeks, the rebel Yan army fought to gain control of the city from the loyalist Tang army. Suiyang was a strategic point on the route from capitals to the southeastern coast. The battle was fierce, with both sides deploying tricky tactics. For instance, the Tang army shot weeds at the Yan army instead of arrows. The Yan army rejoiced, believing the Tangs to be out of arrows. The Yans let their guard down. The Tang shot volleys after volleys of arrows, sending the Yan army into retreat. However, the Yan army returned with 20,000 fresh soldiers. By July, the Tang forces were out of food. By August, all of the insects, animals, and vegetation in the area had been eaten. According to ancient historians, the city's residents traded their children for dead bodies so they could eat. The Tang general, Zhang Shun, killed his concubine in front of his soldiers and ordered them to eat her. The army then ate the city's horses, followed by its women, old men, and then young men. When the city finally fell, only 400 people remained. It is estimated that 20,000 to 30,000 civilians were eaten. Ancient Greece. Ghost stories are not a recent invention. In ancient Rome, Roman senator Pliny the Younger held fast to this one until he died in 113 AD. A large estate in Athens was abandoned, and rightfully so. In the dead of night, one could hear a noise come from the house, a noise which, if you dared to listen closely, sounded like the rattling of chains. And if you dared to listen closely and heard these chains, then you might see the form of an old man, skinny, almost malnourished, and completely disheveled with dirt and grime, with chains, those ghostly chains, around his wrists and ankles. No one knows if Pliny experienced this specter firsthand, or if he made up the tale. A philosopher named Athenodorus was enthralled by this story, so he rented the house, hoping to confront the ghost. To the philosopher's shock and awe, the ghost appeared the first night, rattling his chains before vanishing. Athenodorus noted the spot where the ghost vanished. The next day, he hired workers to dig up that spot. There, beneath the house, was the skeleton of a man wrapped in chains. The corpse was given a proper burial, and the ghost never appeared again. Another chilling ghost story from ancient Greece comes from the writer Plutarch. In Charanoa, Greece, a boy named Damon was the object of affection for a Roman military commander. Damon rejected the commander time after time. The commander's love turned to rage. Damon realized the commander's rage could, and probably would, turn deadly. Damon gathered a group of friends and set out to kill the Roman commander. Their plan worked. The commander, along with several other Roman soldiers, died in an ambush. The city council condemned Damon and his friends to death. Before he could be executed, Damon had each council member killed. Damon and his friends fled to the countryside and plundered it, becoming some of the worst criminals ancient Greece saw. Time passed. The townspeople allowed Damon to return to his home. The details are murky, but he was killed shortly afterward in the local bathhouse. Then, certain phantoms appeared in that place. Groans were heard. The bathhouse was shuttered, but the sights and sounds of dead men continue to this very day. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, on Hinterkaifeck Farm in Bavaria, Germany, 6 residents were murdered with a pickaxe. The victims included husband and wife, Andreas and Kazilia Gruber, their widowed daughter, Victoria, Victoria's 2 children, Kazilia and Joseph, and the family's maid, Maria. 2-year-old Joseph was killed in his crib, and Maria was killed in her bed, while the rest of the family was then murdered in the barn and stacked up on top of each other. Strange events occurred in and around Hinterkaifeck before the attack. The family maid had quit 6 months earlier, reportedly due to hearing strange sounds in the attic and believing the house to be haunted. Andreas found an unfamiliar newspaper on the property in March 1922, leading him to suspect that it was lost by the postman. However, nobody nearby subscribed to that newspaper. Days before the murders, Gruber informed neighbors about tracks in the snow leading from the forest to a broken door lock in the farm's machine room. Later, during the night, footsteps were heard in the attic, but no one was found when Gruber searched the building. According to a school friend of Cecilia, the 7-year-old girl claimed that her mother Victoria had fled the farm after a violent quarrel and was later found in the forest. Initial investigations were hindered by numerous individuals who had interacted with the crime scene, moved bodies and items, and even cooked and eaten in the kitchen. The day after the bodies were found, court physician performed autopsies in the barn. It was determined that a mattock was likely the murder weapon, although it was not found at the scene. Evidence revealed that the younger Cecilia had been alive for several hours after the assault. She had torn out tufts of her hair while lying in the straw. Initially suspecting robbery as the motive, the police interrogated traveling craftsmen, vagrants, and inhabitants from nearby villages. This theory was abandoned when a large sum of money was discovered in the house. It was clear that the perpetrators had remained at the farm for several days, feeding the cattle, consuming all the bread, and recently cutting meat from the pantry. In the inspection record of the court commission, it was noted that the victims were likely drawn to the barn due to restlessness in the stable, resulting in noises from the animals. A later attempt showed that human screams from the barn could not be heard in the living area. On the night following the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, artisan Michael Palkel happened to pass by the farm. He noticed that the oven had been heated by someone. The person approached him with a lantern, blinding him momentarily, and Palkel quickly continued on his way. He also detected a revolting smell from the fireplace smoke. This incident was not investigated further to determine what had been burned in the oven that night. On April 1st at 3 a.m., farmer and butcher Simon Rhinelander, on his way home near Brunnan, saw 2 mysterious figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers noticed him, they turned around to conceal their faces. Later, upon hearing about the murders, Rhinelander considered the possibility that the strangers might be involved. In the middle of May 1927, a stranger allegedly stopped a resident at Wadofen at midnight, asking him questions about the murder before suddenly proclaiming that he was the murderer and fleeing into the woods. This stranger was never identified. Despite repeated arrests, no murderer was ever found. The case files were closed in 1955. On a September day in 1920, during the busy lunch rush on Wall Street, an ordinary-looking man drove a cart with an old horse near the United States Assay Office, across from the J.P. Morgan building. He parked the cart, got down, and quickly vanished into the crowd. Minutes later, the cart exploded, unleashing a barrage of metal fragments. The explosion resulted in the death of over 30 people and left 300 injured. The aftermath was gruesome. The death toll continued to rise throughout the day as more victims succumbed to their injuries. It was thought that the explosion was an accident rather than an intentional act of terrorism. Overnight, maintenance crews cleaned up the damage, discarding any physical evidence that could help identify the perpetrator. The following morning, Wall Street was back in business. Numerous conspiracy theories circulated, but the New York Police and Fire Departments, the Bureau of Investigation, and the United States Secret Service were determined to uncover the truth. Each lead was diligently pursued. Hundreds of people who had been in the area before, during, and after the attack were interviewed. However, little valuable information was gathered because the recollections of the driver and the cart were vague and unhelpful. The most promising lead emerged prior to the explosion. A mailman had discovered 4 poorly spelled and printed flyers in the Wall Street area from a group calling themselves the American Anarchist Fighters. The flyers demanded the release of political prisoners. These letters bore similarities to ones used in 2 bombing campaigns the previous year, orchestrated by Italian anarchists. The Bureau launched an investigation along the East Coast to trace the printing of these flyers, but their efforts proved unsuccessful. Based on previous bomb attacks, the Bureau suspected followers of Italian anarchist Luigi Galliani to be responsible for the crime. The case lacked sufficient evidence. Plus, Galliani had already fled the country. Over the next 3 years, leads grew cold. Promising trails led to dead ends. Ultimately, the identity of the bomber or bombers remained unknown. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified serial killer who operated in New Orleans, Louisiana, and nearby areas from May 1918 to October 1919. While some press reports mention similar murders dating back to 1911, recent research has cast doubt on the accuracy of these claims. The Axeman's true identity was never discovered. The murders remain unsolved. The killer primarily targeted Italian immigrants and Italian Americans, which raises the possibility of racial motivation. Since the perpetrator was never apprehended, this theory was never definitively proven. Italian grocer Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine were attacked in their New Orleans home on May 23, 1918. The intruder cut their throats with a razor and then used an axe to strike their heads. Joseph survived briefly, but died later. The killer left behind bloody clothes and a razor belonging to Andrew Maggio, Joseph's brother. Despite suspicion, Andrew was released due to lack of evidence. Catherine Maggio suffered a deep throat cut leading to her death. A chilling message referencing a previous axe attack on the Sciambra couple was found nearby. The killer wrote, "Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony." Louis Bessemer and Harriet Lowe were attacked at Bessemer's grocery store. Bessemer suffered a skull fracture while Lowe was injured in the ear. They were found in a pool of blood by a delivery driver. Police arrested a suspect, but he was later released due to lack of evidence. Bessemer was suspected of being a German spy, but was acquitted of murder charges after serving 9 months in prison. Harriet Lowe was attacked while in bed with Louis Bessemer. She was found unconscious and taken to a local hospital. Lowe's scandalous statements in her status as Bessemer's mistress caused media frenzy. She disliked the police chief and refused to cooperate. Despite her suspicions, Lowe returned home but died shortly after surgery. She accused Bessemer before her death. Anna Schneider was attacked in the evening of August 5, 1918. The pregnant woman was repeatedly struck in the face by a dark figure. Her scalp was cut open and she was covered in blood. Her husband found her. She gave birth 2 days later. Nothing was stolen. James Gleason, an ex-convict, was arrested but later released due to lack of evidence. Investigators believe the attack was connected to previous incidents. Joseph Romano, an elderly man, was attacked in his home on August 10, 1918. His nieces Pauline and Mary found him with severe head injuries. The assailant, described as a dark-skinned, heavy-set man in a dark suit and slouched hat, fled the scene. Romano died 2 days later. The home was ransacked, but nothing was stolen. A bloody axe was found in the backyard. The back door had been chiseled. This murder caused panic, with reports of the Axeman lurking. Charles Cortamaglia, his wife Rosie, and their infant daughter Mary were attacked in their home on March 10, 1919. Grocer Ladano Giordano heard screams and found them injured. Rosie held their deceased daughter while Charles was bleeding on the floor. Both suffered skull fractures. No items were stolen, but a chiseled back door panel and a bloody axe were found. Rosie accused the grocer and his son Frank, who were later found guilty but released when Rosie confessed to falsely accusing them. The 2-year-old daughter, Mary, was killed during the attack, with a single blow to the back of her neck. Steve Bocco, a grocer, was attacked in his bedroom on August 10, 1919 by an axe-wielding intruder. He woke up to find a dark figure standing over him. Bocco ran to his neighbor's house for help after realizing he had been seriously injured. No items were stolen, but the back door had been tampered with. Bocco survived the attack but had no memory of the incident. Sarah Lawman was attacked on September 3, 1919. Neighbors found her unconscious in her home after she didn't respond. She had a severe head injury and missing teeth. The intruder entered through an open window and used a blunt object. A bloody axe was found outside. Lawman recovered but could not remember the attack. Mike Pepitone was attacked on October 27, 1919. His wife discovered a large man with an axe leaving their bedroom. Mike was injured and covered in blood. The room, including a painting of the Virgin Mary, was splattered with blood. Mrs. Pepitone could not describe the killer. This was the final Axeman attack.